Hello guys, my name is Sudarshan. Welcome to my channel today. Today I'm going to make a video about Saturn in different houses, and how does Saturn work in your chart? What are the responsibilities that it brings? What are the restrictions that it brings? Which are the relationships that you may feel responsibility towards? What are the daily routines that Saturn can make you do? When does it ease? When does Saturn take hold of your life, and so on and so forth? So here we go. To begin with, Saturn is a planet that shows restrictions. Saturn shows limitations. Saturn shows responsibilities, discipline. So wherever Saturn is placed in your chart, you have to be mindful of those things. Let's say, for example, there are a lot of stuff that we don't like to do, but we have to do. If you don't do it, it is going to create a lot of problem for you, and that is what Saturn shows. So if Saturn, any activity, let's say for example, waking up in the morning, taking a shower, going to work or going to school or college, starting your work, all the single details, every single thing is shown by Saturn. Going to work, staying there for 8 hours. Not a lot of people like to go to work. But if Saturn is good, then Venus is more favorable. If you are more disciplined, the chances are you will get more money. The chances are you will be more organized. You will be able to save more money, and so on and so forth. If you're more disciplined, you will waste less money, and so on and so forth. So if Saturn is badly placed in your chart, the chances are the support from Venus would also be not that great. But at the same time, again, it depends on what dignity, what other planets aspect your Venus, what other planets aspect your Saturn, how is Saturn mellowed, how is Saturn increased, and so on and so forth. Coming back to it, one of the important things that a lot of people don't talk about, or what I refer to in the astrology community, it is generally considered that Saturn is something that comes from your past life. But what I've come to know is Saturn is something that comes to you as a responsibility because of the lack of nurture, lack of discipline, or whatever the case may be, the lack of responsibility towards a certain thing, or a good part of your life or good aspect of Saturn comes to you because of the lineage that you're born into. So here's how I see it, and here's how I've seen it in many clients' charts as well. So let's say, for example, if you are brought up by someone who is very responsible, it could be your parents, your uncle, you could foster parents, but the way you've been raised, the way you've been inculcated, what's in your DNA is exactly how you respond in your life, and that's exactly what Saturn is. So if let's say, for example, if you have a diabetes in your family, it comes through the lineage to the next person in the family as well. Exactly like that, all the planets that sits in your chart, that's how they come. That's how they behave exactly. So what your responsibility is, that as the next generation in your family, is to take care of the planets that are giving trouble to your lineage. I belong to southern part of India, from south of India, and we have in our tradition, we give a huge importance of ensuring that our ancestors who have passed away, we make sure we fulfill their wishes. We try to make them happy even after they pass away. During the Amavasya, during the lunar eclipse, when the moon is completely gone, we tend to perform a certain puja like a devotee to our ancestors, trying to please our ancestors. Because if our ancestors are not happy, we believe that our next generation is not going to be happy as well, because we need the blessings from the ancestors, from our ancestral background. So essentially, that's what the charts and the planets, and usually that's what it means. Not necessarily it relates to previous birth, but it does definitely relate to the lineage that has brought you up or given birth to you. It could be your father's, or your mother, or your uncle, or your grandfather. Someone's negative aspect of their chart is going to reflect into your chart, and this you can go through. Many charts. This you experience if you've gone through many charts of many generations. Fortunately, I've been able to look into the charts of grandfathers, fathers, kids, and the grandkids, and that's how I realized that if you have a certain dosha in your chart, it doesn't just go away until you make work towards it. And there are different ways you can. There are different remedies. There are different ways you can kind of subtly take it out, but if you don't work towards it, it's just going to go through your entire lineage one after another, and it's going to make you suffer, not only you, your grandkids, and coming future generation of yours. So this is something that you have to keep in mind. So let's get back to the topic. What happens? What are the effects of Saturn in different houses? So let's start with the first house. So I usually refer to a North Indian chart. So if this, I'm not referring to science. The science would give you a different result, which we'll talk about in the next video. That's a completely different topic. I'm also not talking about different aspects of Saturn with other planets, different conjunctions that Saturn could have. That, again, is a huge topic. We will require entire maybe 45 minutes, 30 minutes video for that. But for now, we are focusing on Saturn, only Saturn in different houses in D1 chart. It's the first chart, that's a Lagna chart. So let's say, for example, if Saturn is sitting in your ascendant, that's your Lagna. So if Saturn is sitting in your ascendant, it primarily makes, first of all, think about what is Saturn. Saturn is basically limitation, restriction, discipline, a planet which basically shows responsibility which you don't like, which you have to do but you don't like. And what is ascendant? Ascendant is yourself, your body. Someone who's lean, someone who's short, usually is depicted by Saturn. Saturn is crooked. Saturn is also one-eyed, one-legged. He has a crooked walk. In mythology, it's considered to be a son of the sun itself, the planet Sun. So it's the sixth planet in the universe. It is the farthest of Sun as far as considered the inner planets or the outer planets, whatever you consider, however you consider, disregarding Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus. But Saturn is the sixth planet. It comes after Jupiter. So what does Saturn do? Saturn in the ascendant would make a person have a moderate amount of height. It wouldn't make person very tall. It would generally keep, unless Saturn is weak or debilitated, then it would have a different aspect. But if Saturn, usually, majority of cases, you would see a person with a moderate height. Someone who's thin, someone who you can see veins in their body. Even if they're thin, they don't have to be muscular, they don't have to exercise or anything, but you can still see their vein. Usually they have a darker complexion, dark bluish, darker complexion, depending on where you're born. The definition of dark in itself would differ, but usually you would have a darker complexion. You can also have some issues with your teeth, or you may have prominent teeth, or you may have issues with teeth where you have cavities and so on and so forth. Also, the fact that Saturn here makes you, as far as this is the physical attributes. If you talk about psychological attributes, it makes a person more responsible towards himself. Someone who's always sad, or someone who's dry. Even when he has a when he tries to crack a joke, he would usually be someone who is dry, or someone who laughs little. He doesn't have a prominent smile, prominent laughter. He would be shy when he smiles. Also, the fact that it makes a person a little bit cunning. Again, depending on aspects, that things could differ, but it does make person cunning. He's someone who understands that life is not easy. Life is not, nothing just comes to you. These are the person who would usually see the bad part of life. These are the people who would usually go in a spiritual congregation, or where they see when everyone is saying that, oh wow, this is a great opportunity, it's amazing, and person with Saturn in the first house, he's the one who would come up and say, yeah, it's great, but who knows what happens, you got to take it careful. Or these are the people who would always be serious about, until the goal is achieved, they're kind of serious about the outcome. Even if they have, let's say for example, they're in basketball and their team is way ahead and the other team is, kind of behind, there would still be someone who's like, okay, you know what, the game is still on. We until the game is over, it's not really over. So let's just go for it. Let's just kill it. So these are Saturn. They're usually good natured. They have sympathy for others, but at the same time, they have more sympathy about themselves. They can't do service. They can do service to anyone, almost anyone who goes up to them and says, can you do this for me or do that for me? They would usually be okay with it, as long as they know that it's going to be beneficial for them in future. They are more service oriented as well. Depending, again, a lot of these predictions would depend on what planet are aspecting and what are conjunction with this and which sign Saturn is sitting in. Coming on to the Saturn in second house, it's a difficult position. Usually someone with Saturn in the second house would definitely have problems with their teeth. They may have a crooked teeth, they may have broken teeth the later part of the year of their life. Saturn is also a slow-moving planet, so this is something that prevents the person getting into a job, or even if they do get into a job, it may not be a high-paying job. It would restrict a person's income or make the person's income unstable. At the same time, this is also a great position for someone who is in business, because business is something that is unstable. It's where a person would the income every month is not exactly decided. It's where you have to work for the income. You have to work for building up income, make sure you are continuing in the business. Unlike in job, where the majority of time what you are looking for is presence in the job. As long as you are present 30 days or 22 days, depending on where you are, 25 days with job you're working on, you are guaranteed a certain amount. Saturn in the second house kind of takes away that guarantee. It would take away that guarantee. It is also a position which would take you away from your family. Although you are responsible for the family, but it may take you away from the family as well. For example, let's say for example, you see a lot of people who are working abroad. They may be working in Saudi Arabia or US or Canada or Australia and so on and so forth. They're working in different continents, different countries. They're sending back money to their family. So this is kind of that. You are taking responsibility of that person, of the family. However, you are separated from them. So Saturn in the second house kind of makes that, because it has an aspect to the fourth house, which separates you. It also has an aspect to eighth house, which kind of takes you away from stability. It makes a person resistant to change. Again, there are different planets. There are 9 different planets. There's 12 different houses, depending on different aspects. Which house the Saturn rules, it would differ. It would depend on those things, but primarily this is what it shows. Even the food habits, they may like more dry stuff. They may like more cold stuff. They're prone to like ice cream a little bit more. They may be someone who lives in a colder countries, or someone, even if not colder countries, then someone who's extremely averse to cold, like who's less sensitive to cold. They may prone to like those kind of situations. Saturn in the third house. Saturn in the third house, what it primarily does is kind of gives you more responsibility about your siblings. You're more worried about your siblings. You may be separated from your siblings as well, but at the same time, it gives you more responsibility. You're more worried about your siblings. It's kind of love-hate relationship wherever Saturn sits. So It's something that you have to deal with, but at the same time you don't want to deal with it. So that's Saturn. Again, depending on the sign, it may be something that comes naturally to you, because if it is sitting in the sign of Libra, it may give a natural knack of dealing with your sibling. You may know exactly how and what he needs, and what is it that you would give him and he would just go away, or what is it that if you keep from him or her, then that's going to control him and make him a good person or whatever in those situations. So that's what Saturn is basically. So Saturn in the third house, not only sibling, but also it's an ability of being an entrepreneur. It's an ability of taking risk. It's an ability of your hand skills. So usually when Saturn is in the third house, it's aspecting your, so from third it's aspecting your sixth house as well, fifth house. It's aspecting your ninth house, which is a house of luck and divinity. It is also aspecting the 10th from third house is basically your 11th house. So basically these are the houses that are aspected. There is a risk-averse attitude. A person who is averse to take risk, a person who is averse to going out and doing stuff that is needed to be done. And this is the lesson for them. So if they go out and do it, it's great. If they don't do it, they're going to suffer because they don't do it. It is wherever Saturn sits, it's inevitable. You have to do it. If you don't do it, it's going to come out in the next generation, as I said it before. It is 12th from 4th. It's basically, it does give you a tendency to get rejections in visa. So if you file for a visa, depending on other planets as well, but if you file for a visa and if you get a lot of rejections in visa, if you because it is a government agency, it's a stamping, it's government approval, passport, and so on and so forth. So if you see a lot of issue in approvals, in passport issues, and so on and so forth, it's more than likely that your third house is somehow affected by Ketu, Rahu, Saturn, and so on and so forth. Most likely Rahu or Saturn, which will give you more rejections from the government as well. But at the end of the day, Saturn is a planet of delays, if not denial. So it will give you an approval if you're persistent. That's what Saturn teaches you. So it will eventually work out. What happens when the Saturn is in the fourth house? Saturn in the fourth house is usually separates from your families. It's a planet of separation, planet of restriction, limitation. It may limit the number of members in the family. It is also ruled. Fourth house also rules your car, office, house. So it may give you old car. Basically what I mean is it's secondhand car is usually seen in the Saturn in the fourth house. Again, depending on other planets and other aspects, but that's what usually it means. It also means that you may construct a house, or you may, if you're buying a house, usually it's a secondhand house. It's not a brand new built and you just walk into it. Even if you try to buy that, usually it would happen that the house was used for a display purpose and then you bought it. So it's usually old houses or used houses or used cars is what you are attracted towards. It also means that a lot of in your house there may be a lot of elderly people. The number of people in the house would maybe pertaining depending on what other aspects are, but usually it would be number of people in your family would be less. They may live an isolated life. Everyone is separated from each other usually. It is again aspecting your sixth house, which is limiting your daily routines. So you may be prone to someone who doesn't have a lot of routine because it is separating from your house. So if you're staying away from your house, it wouldn't give you a lot of routine in terms of your house. It also aspects your 10th house. It's going to give you some trouble in terms of staying out, living out. Again, depending on what planets are aspected from the 10th house or to the 10th house. But if Saturn is aspecting your 10th house, it's going to give you a challenging career. It may give a lot of politics or cunning people in your career, in your job, in your profession, depending on the sign that is in the 10th house. But it will give you, it will definitely bring politics in your workplace. But it may also create a situation where you work from home. When I say work from home, not necessarily in the home that you were brought in, but it may, let's say for example, you're 25 or 30, you were separated from your birthplace, you were separated from your parents at the age of 18, and then you go out and stay, and then you work out in a country, in a different country, in a different city, in a different state, and that's how the Saturn. But there you may get an opportunity to work from home. But again, different planets, different signs, different aspects to the planet may have its own impact. However, this is one thing for sure, that it will make you a contract worker, someone who is not necessarily paid. In the Western countries, you usually get paid either as a contractor and or you get paid as a permanent employee. But Saturn in the fourth house would usually make you someone, because of the aspect in the sixth and the 10th house and the ascendant, it would usually make you someone who is working as a contractor as opposed to someone who's working full-time as an employee. Now it does tend to increase the years of contract, but it doesn't necessarily give you a full-time employment where the deductions and everything is taking place, because it's your responsibility. It becomes your responsibility to figure those things out, the taxes and everything, because Saturn also rules taxes. What happens if the Saturn is in the fifth house? Again, you have responsibility towards your kids. You have responsibility towards creativity. You feel that you want to create. You are someone who tends to stay close to something that's already established. You don't like too many creative stuff. You want to stay away from. You're quick to establish a system. Like, okay, this is the system, this is where everything goes, this is where everything will be kept, and this is how it works out. Someone who is extremely rigid in terms of how the things should be, as opposed to someone who is, because again, it's a house of sun. Saturn and sun don't go that well, and sun is all about creativity. It brings in new stuff. It brings in, okay, how am I going to do this? How am I going to do that? And so on and so forth. If Saturn is in the fifth house, it's the opposite of that. How am I going to bring everything together so that I can repeat everything day in, day out the same? It can bring creativity, but then there is a system in the creativity. It's not Picasso. It's not one of the great painters who may have random ideas. They can just you give them a paintbrush, they would just start brushing and bring up some new things. But Saturn in the fifth house is someone who's organized in his creativity, someone who is creative but in a different kind. So that's what Saturn in the fifth house as far as the work goes. It aspects your seventh house, which gives some issues in the trouble. Saturn in the fifth house can also give you, depending on which planet it is sitting with and which sign it is sitting with, but most likely because it's a house of love and creativity, it would give a huge difference between age difference between you and your spouse. So if you are, there would usually be a difference of at least 5 to 6 years, and even more. It could be younger or older, again depending on other planets, because it's aspect seventh house. And depending on where Venus is sitting and what's the position of Venus, if Venus is debilitated or Venus is dangerously restricted, then definitely Saturn plays a bigger role in this. Saturn in the sixth house. Saturn in the sixth house is someone who's restricted in his daily routine, someone who's trying to stay away from their enemies, who's kind of follow the rules, follow the legal system, follow the if you don't follow the system, you're there may be 10 people driving at about over speed limit, but you're the one. If you're the one who drives over speed limit, you're the one who's getting caught first. So you are someone who has to make sure that you stay in the lane. You find yourself someone getting into legal trouble more often. If you break legal law, the chances are you may find it more difficult to get out of it, or you are the one who gets caught, despite the fact that there are many people breaking the law. So that's Saturn in the sixth house. It also rules. It also shows stepmother. So if you have a stepmother or step parents, this is something that you may not like. This is something that you may not have a very good relationship with your step parents or stepmother. At least at the beginning of the relationship, you would not have a good relationship, but eventually it may turn out that you have a good relationship after a certain period of time. If Saturn rules seventh house, a delayer of marriage, it shows your spouse. Usually, either you have an age difference or you don't get married at all. This is the thing that's about Saturn in the first house or Saturn in the seventh house, because it's aspecting your 7th house. Depending on Venus's position, it may show lack of marriage or lack of congenial marital life, marital happiness, or it may show divorce, separation. But and if there is a marriage, there would be an age difference as well. Now you have to look at other planets. Do not take it a linear understanding of planets just like this. There is Venus, which is which has a significant role in marriage. There is Mars, which has a significant role in marriage as well, and there's Jupiter, which has a significant role in overall life. So, just as Saturn can in itself not be a predictor of everything, but in general, the system, this is how the system works.
Click on the items with the red X and find
If Saturn is ruling your 8th house, 8th house usually rules your occult, 8th house rules your longevity, 8th house rules your occult sciences, underground things, taxation is 8th house. So usually if you have Saturn in the 8th house, usually eventually you may find yourself someone who's working for occult, someone who has great devotion towards occult. You have a karma towards occult. Remember, Saturn is also karaka for 8th house, just like 6th house. And it's from here, it's aspecting your 10th house, which is basically your profession. So it would not let you settle in the profession. It'll bring a lot of changes, because 8th house, from the 8th house, is bringing the 8th house energy into the 10th house. So what it's doing is it's not letting you settle in the career. I'm not saying you won't have a good career. In fact, you may be transitioning to your career really quick, someone who's growing through your career really quick. However, despite the fact you may not stick around in the same job for a long period of time, someone who makes quick changes, maybe 2 years, and you're like, okay, I'm done with this. It could be because you don't like it. It could be because you have other responsibilities. It could be there are a lot of changes which are beyond your control. That is 8th house. So most likely it's the third one. It's because of the changes that you do not have, because of the control of life that you don't have in your hand, because 8th house is Saturn. From there brings that energy, and it'll show you how to adapt to these changes, and you should be okay with this, because you resist change. Someone who has Saturn in the 8th house, they usually resist change. They don't like change for the long run. They're usually someone who has been either in an abusive relationship, or someone who is suffering from some or the other psychological dilemma, and that's how they become healers. So that's how they get longevity as well. So Saturn in the 9th house. Saturn in the 9th house brings responsibilities towards your parent, towards your father, also your guru. Someone who's not listening to guru, or someone who doesn't listen to your father or guru may be strict, who brings a discipline into your life, saying that, okay, you have to do this in order for you to be able to achieve things in your life. It's a natural good house for Sun. Again, it's one of the outer houses, so Saturn doesn't really like the 9th house. 8th is as high as Saturn would like. So usually Saturn suffers in the 9th house. Saturn is something, again, depending on the sign, aspects, and conjunctions, but usually Saturn doesn't like to be in the 9th house. Saturn is more like, I'm just going to go ahead and work, and 9th house is a house of luck. So if it's kind of confused in the house of 9th house. 9th house is also a house where usually you would go out and pray, be spiritual, go out on long journeys. And Saturn is like, okay, if it's Saturn is in the 9th house, it doesn't perform really well, because a person is too much devoted, too much working towards thinking about luck, thinking too much about or expecting too much about someone who wants to buy a lottery. And it's like I've known people who would buy lotteries for years and years and years, spend a lot of money in buying the lotteries, but they kind of find it difficult. They would hardly get any money, but they just keep at it. Also, someone it can make someone who is prone to be extremely religious, but at the same time who would also be prone to asking questions against it, depending on the sign it's sitting in. But it does bring in religion and spirituality as a big concern in person's life, and you cannot just run away from it. You have to resolve it if you want to make sure that the next future generations doesn't get bothered by it. Saturn at the 10th house, again, it makes a person businessman. It gives you a business tendency. Because it's aspecting your 12th house of losses. It is also aspecting your 7th house of business, 4th house separation, and 10th house in itself. So it usually would not give you a stable career. Even if it does give you a stable career, the income in itself would be up and down. Where someone who's a salesperson, or someone who's someone who's in mundane work can also show in Saturn in the 10th house, because but you would not like it. So someone who's in administrative services, someone who's in administrative work, he's studied for those services, he's studied and worked for a legal system and so on and so forth, but he eventually doesn't like those systems. So that's Saturn in the 10th house. Saturn in the 11th house, aspecting your 1st house ascendant, 5th house, and your 8th house. So this brings a lot of uncertainty, but at the same time a big a lottery kind of income eventually at the later part of here. It gives good legacy, inheritance possibly, because it is eventually aspecting 8th house as well. It is aspecting your 5th house, it is aspecting your ascendant, so it may make a person short and thin, someone who is who believes in savings account, who believes in mutual funds, someone who believes long-term savings, doesn't necessarily invest in speculative stocks or penny stocks, someone who doesn't really believe in cryptocurrencies, but they would believe in putting money into a 4% or 3% savings account, or 1% savings account. They're like, okay, I need an emergency fund, I need this, I need that. So they're kind of that. They would also benefit from investing in oil stocks, or oil companies. They may be working in oil companies as well, or underground money as well matters as well. Saturn in the 12th house. Saturn in the 12th house, it's not a congenial situation, regardless of which sign it is. But 12th house is a house of losses, and it is also a house, because it is aspecting 6th house. It also affects your borrowed money, your ability to lend. So you would people would usually see you as someone who does not return money, or someone who's extremely disciplined in returning money. Loan aspect, debt would play a significant part in your life. Borrowed money would play a significant part in your life. Again, someone who has business would have a position of Saturn in the 12th house. Someone who doesn't work can also have a position of Saturn in the 12th house, because it's aspecting your 9th house, it's aspecting your 3rd house, and it's also aspecting your 6th house. So you have to be, 6th house is a house of loans, 2nd house is a house of income. So depending on which Mahadasa you're going through, depending on what's the planetary transits, it will affect your life overall. So you got to be mindful of those situations and then take the decisions accordingly. So there you go. So keep an eye out for next video. Next time I'm going to do a video about Saturn in different signs, how it affects, if Saturn is in Aries, Saturn is in Libra, Saturn is in Gemini, what are the different aspects that the Saturn will bring in your life. So keep tuned, subscribe to my video, and I'll bring in you more information and different kind of information apart from that you would usually see on YouTube or different channels. Look forward to it.